Is this sort of one of those... Are we in a sort of weighing up doing things the right way versus doing things the fast way? Is that an unflattering way of looking at this?
So look, I think we've got some perverse incentives in the way that we do resource management today. So it costs very little for people to stop progress. So, one supermarket chain stops the other one from doing a supermarket development and can do that for years. So all of the wrong incentives are in the system. Local government isn't incentivised to put resource consents out there because it can only recover its costs, and because if we get a leaky building type scenario, they bear all of the downside. So we've got to take the serious work that the resource reform that Judge Tony Randerson was leading, and we've got to make sure that this short-term fix goes into a long-term solution so that we get a much better system.
Paul Blair from Infrastructure NZ, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jenny, you're in the business of financial advising. Is this a big issue for projects across the board, not just infrastructure, but other businesses?
That's a little bit outside my scope, but I will say that, we hear from our publicly listed companies that at times the RMA can cause hold-ups and issues with infrastructure development. And I think, certainly we're going into an economic environment where we want to keep the economy moving. And, that coupled with an election year, we have a government that is motivated to provide a way of people spending money on infrastructure. So I think while I think it's a really good solution, and I do think that it's a necessary solution, I might be a little questioning of the motivation of doing it right now, as opposed to looking at it from a longer term point of view. I think the long term point of view is the one we need to take.
Jordan, the Resource Management Act has evolved into an unwieldy beast, according to some people. Do you think that this is a good chance to sort of reform what is occasionally described as, it's quite a bloated piece of legislation?
I've never heard anyone really compliment the way that we plan our land use and make decisions about projects. So taking a short-term step on some limited areas of projects to help with the recovery seems like something any government would do and seems reasonable. And if we can learn some lessons there, how to more effectively get reasoned public input into stuff and how to make the system work a bit more carefully, well, not carefully, but cleanly and quickly, that might be stuff that could be built into that longer reform agenda. So, I think it's like with every disaster, there's that kind of response to unblock things. To me, it does suggest, as a complete non-expert, that there might be something wrong with the way the system is working currently.
But there is, of course, that environmental elephant in the room, isn't there, Jenny?
Oh, look, yes, there is. And, we are a country that values our environment and values and sees the value in that clean, green image overseas. But, there's got to be a balance. It's like everything we're considering at the moment, isn't it? There's got to be a balance between lockdowns and freedoms and the environment and the need to spend money on infrastructure. So it's all a balance.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Getting the balance right is important.
Indeed, yes. We have unfortunately run out of time, but thank you very much to our panellists today, Jordan Carter from Internet NZ and Jenny Morton from Craig's Investment Partners. It has been lovely having you on. And Checkpoint is up next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, 0 new cases of COVID-19 today. The High Court rules a man returning from the UK is allowed to leave mandatory quarantine to visit his dying father, despite an exemption being denied earlier. Marist College, the school at the centre of one of our biggest clusters, offers all its students and teachers COVID tests. The Prime Minister's dialling into an Australian government cabinet meeting tomorrow to talk trans-Tasman bubbles, but don't expect it to happen anytime soon. Parts of Auckland got more than half a metre of rain over the weekend, but the city's still facing a big dry. And shining, gleaming, steaming, flax and wax in here, we look at life under lockdown with no hairdresser.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister has stressed the need for New Zealand to stay the course as it celebrates a key milestone in the battle against COVID-19. For the first time in 7 weeks, the country has recorded no new cases of the coronavirus. Jacinda Ardern says her message remains the same. New Zealanders must not squander the progress now by relaxing or flouting the rules.
I'm a perfectionist. I want to see those numbers after we've been in alert level 3 long enough for it to be a reflection of alert level 3. And so at the moment what we're seeing is all of the good work New Zealanders put in to the lockdown. This is the waiting room. This is where we check if we're recovering well and that we've got it right. We need a few more days to check we have.
Jacinda Ardern says she will lay out the rules under level 2 on Thursday. The prospect of a trans-Tasman travel bubble will be discussed when the Prime Minister joins Australia's National Cabinet meeting tomorrow. Ms Ardern says both countries are in the enviable position of being able to even consider opening their borders to each other, compared with many others around the world. She says they will compare notes about their respective health responses that will include Australia's use of the contact tracing app. But Ms Ardern says any potential travel could still be some time away.
Don't expect this to happen in a couple of weeks' time. As you can imagine, we need to make sure that we're locking in the gains that all New Zealanders have helped us achieve, and make sure that we have health precautions in place to make sure we do this safely and well.
Jacinda Ardern. The High Court has allowed a man to leave mandatory quarantine to visit his dying father, despite having recently returned from the United Kingdom. Oliver Christiansen was able to visit his father and spend 36 hours with him until he died on Sunday. Ananzaki reports.
Oliver Christiansen arrived in New Zealand from London on April 23rd. He initially planned to wait out the isolation period, but his father, who had brain cancer, was given days to live. This prompted him to ask for an exemption, which was denied and subsequently led to the High Court ruling. Mr. Christiansen's barrister Simon Foote QC says the Health Act allows for discretion and it had to be applied in this instance. This is Anand Zaki.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the Ministry of Health will use the judgment to assess how isolation policy can be managed in the future. A major credit rating agency says New Zealand is probably already in recession but has reaffirmed its top-level rating. But S&P Global Ratings has left the country's rating at the high-level AA with a positive outlook. Here's business editor Giles Beckford.
S&P Ratings is the last of the big three global agencies to reaffirm the country's ratings in the past month. The common themes are that New Zealand has strong fundamentals, was in a strong fiscal position before the pandemic hit, and has been quick to cushion the impact. S&P says the loss of earnings from tourism and foreign education will hurt, and the high level of household debt and weakening property markets are risks. But it says the economy is strong enough to withstand higher government borrowing and an expected 2.4% contraction in growth this year, which will lead to a bounce back of nearly 2% next year. This is Giles Beckford.
The Auckland Regional Public Health Service says the Marist College COVID-19 cluster is probably not circulating, but people should get tested anyway. Hundreds of students and staff at the school are this week being offered COVID-19 tests. But the Public Health Services Director, Dr. William Ranger, says there's only been one case in the cluster in the past 2 weeks, and the testing is mainly about reassuring the community. Gun owners are questioning whether the Police Minister made errors in not offering compensation for ammunition. A judicial review hearing is underway at the High Court in Wellington between the Council of Licensed Firearms Owners and the Minister of Police. It's now illegal to buy, sell and possess certain types of ammunition after last year's Christchurch mosque shootings. The gun group wants the court to decide whether owners can be reimbursed for ammunition. Jack Hodder QC, who's representing the group in court, questioned comments by the Police Minister Stuart Nash that ammunition has a smaller value than weapons.
And so if one has got a substantial stockpile for the reasons of, for example, converting it into more usable ammunition, as Ms McKee described in her affidavit, then you may finish up with a respectable value of material held.
Lawyer Jack Hodder. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. Sport this afternoon, the Warriors captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck says one of the aims of the team is to play in front of their own fans again this season. The rugby league side is in quarantine in Tamworth in New South Wales for the next 2 weeks after flying into Australia yesterday. They're allowed to train in groups of 10 ahead of the scheduled resumption of the NRL at the end of the month. Tuivasa-Sheck says it's important that players adhere to all the self-isolation protocols to ensure the game and the public return to normal life as soon as possible.
That's the big hopeful question, we put in the work and government and the risk level really turns down and we're able to come back and play at Mount Smart Stadium, play back in Auckland, New Zealand, and we're wishing for that to happen, but again we're taking it week by week and we'll see how we go.
Warriors skipper Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. And that's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, Waikato social agencies experience unprecedented demand for food parcels, including requests from other regions. Tara June Winch on dispossession, reclaiming Indigenous language, and her new novel, The Yield. Sweet axe throwing founder Lloyd Bombell on finding your inner lumberjack, and media commentator Andrew Holden keeping you company and up to date. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service taking us through to midnight tomorrow Tuesday for the North Island, except Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Periods of rain or showers, heavy falls and possible squally thunderstorms easing in Gisborne overnight tonight. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers, more frequent for a time tomorrow afternoon. Thunderstorms are possible in Wairarapa. Marlborough, except Koutou Coast, also Nelson and Buller. Showers possibly heavy, thundery with hail. Westland and northern Fiordland, occasional showers, easing south of Hokitika today, becoming fine everywhere later tomorrow. Koutou Coast and Canterbury, scattered rain, spreading north this evening. Some heavy falls possible with hail tomorrow. Otago, Southland and southern Fiordland, showers spreading north about now, becoming heavy with hail overnight and snow down to 500 metres tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, rain turning to showers tomorrow morning, some heavy with hail. 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. For the first time since the COVID-19 outbreak, New Zealand has recorded no new cases and no deaths. But there's a strong warning. Now is not the time to celebrate, as New Zealand is not out of the woods yet. Cabinet met today to discuss what Level 2 would look like if it makes the decision to move out of Level 3 next Monday. And in another first, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern will beam into Australia's National Cabinet meeting tomorrow at the invitation of Scott Morrison. Our political reporter Jane Patterson filed this report.
Today we have no new cases of COVID-19 to report. It means there's no change to the overall total of confirmed and probable cases, which remains at 1,487.
After more than a fortnight of New Zealand recording new cases in the single digits, the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, delivered this news today. But it comes with a warning.
It is just one moment in time. The real test is later this week when we factor in the incubation period for the virus and the time it takes for people to display symptoms, which is generally 5 to 6 days after exposure.
There are 7 people in hospital with none in intensive care. There are still 16 clusters around the country, but 3 of them have now been closed as there have been no cases of community transmission in the past few days. Dr Bloomfield says while today's figures are encouraging, that should not be a signal for people to relax.
We cannot afford to squander all the hard work and effort of the past weeks. We did see at the weekend that it can be easy to start slackening off, and we need to maintain discipline and keep pushing on and sustain the advantage that we have fought so hard for.
University of Otago public health expert Michael Baker says you only need to look to countries like South Korea to see the risk of second wave outbreaks with thousands of cases.
Things can change very quickly with this virus, and so I think there's no cause for celebration yet. I think it's a great symbolic triumph today to have no new cases. It does not mean that the virus has gone from New Zealand. I think we should hold off on our celebrations and the parties till we're safely in level 1, which could be many weeks ahead.
The number of breaches since New Zealand went into level 3 last week was also updated today, but not so encouraging. 191 breaches over the weekend have brought the total number to nearly 600. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says a small number of people could put progress already made at risk.
This is not the majority, but there are a small number of people who are forgetting that any gains you're seeing at the moment are actually from the the lockdown period. We need to stay here a while longer, feel assured that we actually have this under control, and then move. People are jeopardising that at the moment by acting in the way some people did over the weekend.
There is pressure on the government, though, to move out of level 3, both from the opposition leader Simon Bridges and through comparisons with Australia, also doing well controlling the virus but under more lenient restrictions. Tomorrow, Ms Ardern will join Australia's National Cabinet to swap notes and look at possible tourist and trade opportunities in the future, including the Trans-Tasman bubble. But she says that wouldn't happen in the short term, i.e. within coming weeks.
From the conversations we've had to date, we have a very similar perspective of the kind of timeline that both countries will want to run to. In our minds, the health of our people is incredibly important. In New Zealand, we don't want to give away the gains we've made, and nor does Australia want to see any risks either. But we also see a lot of opportunity.
While Cabinet Ministers did talk about what the rules could look like under Level 2, Ms Ardern wasn't giving too much away today. She'll lay out those rules in detail on Thursday, with Cabinet to make its decision about a move to Level 2 next Monday. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The High Court has allowed a man to leave mandatory quarantine to visit his dying father, despite the son having recently returned from the United Kingdom. He is one of 18 out of 24 cases the Prime Minister says has been granted an exception under the lockdown rules.
Reading the judgment, there seems to be concern that it was an automated approach taken to requests on compassionate grounds. Information that I've received from the Ministry of Health, though, sets out that there were 283 requests for an exemption to the conditions of isolation having been received by the 30th of April, that 24 exemptions were sought in cases where a relative was dying or close to dying, of which 18 were granted. So that does suggest that there has been due consideration. That is advice I've received from the Ministry of Health, but I'm sure that they'll be reflecting on this judgment.
Oliver Christiansen was able to visit his father and spend 36 hours with him until he died on Sunday. Mr. Christiansen arrived in New Zealand on April 23rd and initially planned to wait out the 14-day isolation period. But his father, who had brain cancer, was given days to live. This prompted him to ask for an exemption, which was denied, and subsequently led to the High Court ruling. Our reporter Anand Zaki spoke to Mr. Christiansen's lawyer, Simon Foote, QC, and started by asking him about the importance of the ruling.
Well, it was absolutely critical to Oliver and his family. These end-of-life issues that have arisen from the pandemic are incredibly tragic, and we all understand that if at all possible, both for the person who is passing on and for their immediate family, it means an enormous amount to give comfort to all of the family members when there's such a profound event going on. So it couldn't have been more important to Oliver and to his family.
Does this have implications for other cases?
Yes and no. Every case has to be looked at in its own particular circumstances. For example, here, it was important, I think, that Oliver was not symptomatic. He was placed in a low-risk managed isolation facility, and he was seeking permission from the ministry to visit his father at his father's home. So he wasn't. It wasn't required that he needed entry into a medical facility, for example. But having said that, the importance of this case for wider cases is that the ministry has a discretion under the Health Act order that requires people to be in quarantine when they arrive from overseas, and that discretion can be used where there is compassionate grounds and the person who is asking for the exemption is a low risk of transmission of COVID-19. And there's a further discretion even beyond that in exceptional circumstances. So that discretion plainly has to be applied in relation to the particular circumstances of each individual case. But what happened here was that the ministry applied that discretion very rigidly in relation only to certain categories published on the website, and were either unable or unwilling to look at the wider picture. And in my view, going forward, for similar cases, which there no doubt will be, the ministry needs to take a closer look and a more compassionate look at all these circumstances.
Some would argue this is a major health crisis and hard rules are necessary. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's undoubtedly a major health crisis, but that doesn't mean that hard rules must apply. In fact, I think it means the opposite, that we need to, or the officials need to have an open mind to all the unexpected circumstances that can crop up from time to time. And the Health Act order specifically allows for exemptions to managed isolation on compassionate grounds where there is a low risk of transmission, and also in other exceptional circumstances. So there's no need to apply only hard rules. The law, in fact, is much more flexible than that.
And that was our reporter Anand Zaki speaking to Simon Foote, QC. Hundreds of students and staff at Auckland's Marist College are being offered COVID-19 tests in a bid to reassure the community. 94 people connected with the school have tested positive for the coronavirus, making it the country's second largest cluster after the Bluff wedding. Mackenzie Smith reports.
Of those connected to Marist College who tested positive for COVID-19, all but 8 have recovered, and there's only been one case from the cluster reported in the past 2 weeks. Auckland Regional Public Health Service Director Dr. William Ranger says the virus probably isn't circulating, and the testing is about providing assurance to the community.
So that's to staff, to students and to the families of students, that there is no virus circulating amongst those people before they go back to school at some stage in the future.
This week, all 750 Marist students and about 70 staff are being given vouchers that will enable them to get tested. While the testing is voluntary, School Principal Rochelle Taulu encourages everyone to be tested regardless of whether or not they're symptomatic. At today's media briefing, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, commended the offer.
While only half of the 94 cases associated with the Marist cluster were directly associated with the college, the others were a result of transmission within families or to others in the community. It's important that the wider school community is given the opportunity to be tested.
When asked today if the Marist College testing could be applied to other clusters, Dr. Bloomfield said in some cases it already has been. He says an aged care facility, a Hawke's Bay holiday park, and with some individual cases, testing has been offered to non-symptomatic people.
For the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've been advising on and working closely with the public health units about quite wide testing of asymptomatic people. Justin and I talk about this notion of putting a wide ring fence around these clusters, and particularly in the ARC settings, but it's also being used with some of these other clusters as well.
Dr. Bloomfield says he's looking forward to seeing how much uptake there is for the testing. For Checkpoint, Mackenzie Smith.
It is 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Aucklanders are being warned a weekend of extremely wet weather hasn't brought the city any closer to seeing the end of what is a severe drought. Parts of the city got more than half a metre of rain over the weekend, but the downpours have barely made a dent in the water storage lake levels. Watercare says a drop in overall water usage over the rainy weekend also reveals a concerning amount is being put to bad use. Annika Smith reports.
For the first time in months, Aucklanders nestled into their homes to the pitter-patter and sometimes heavy drumming of rain on their roofs at the weekend. Watercare's chief executive, Raveen Jadaram, says any rain is good news, but there just isn't enough of it.
Lake storage levels are at about 0.7% higher than it was before the rain. So less than 1% difference. It's a welcome change because we need rain. We need all these little rain. But it hasn't broken the drought.
Auckland's storage lake levels dropped below 50% last month, the first time it's dipped below the halfway mark for 25 years. The city can take up to an extra 150 million litres a day from the Waikato River and is drawing on the full amount right now that accounts for a third of Auckland's total supply. Watercare says the city would need significant rainfall over a number of weeks for it to have any impact on the city's water stores. For now, Level 1 water restrictions are in place and people are being asked to use water inside only and limit showers to under 4 minutes. Mr Jadaram says there was an interesting dip in water demand over the rainy weekend. On average, the city uses 420 to 430 million litres of water a day, but this dropped to just 400 during the wet spell.
What it tells us is that when it's raining, our demand in Auckland goes down. The difference, between 400 and 420, 430, that 20 to 30 million litres, that's where the water is used outside. And that's what we're really asking Aucklanders to stop doing.
Auckland isn't the only part of the country facing a prolonged dry spell. In fact, the entire country has received only 67% of its average rainfall to date. The Coromandel Peninsula got as little as 13% of its normal rainfall, while parts of the North Island, including Whangarei, Auckland, Waikato, Whakatane and Napier, have just recorded their driest January to April season on record. Niwa meteorologist Ben Knoll says the effects of so little rain are made worse by the fact that we've had several dry seasons in a row.
But if we look back to 2019, that was quite a dry year across Auckland and Northland, other parts of New Zealand as well. So when you start compounding several seasons in a row, another dry season after yet another dry season, that's when the seriousness of the situation, I think, increases.
Conditions in Northland are showing just how hard an impact this compounding effect can have. Its regional council recorded a very dry winter in 2018, followed by one of the driest years on record in 2019. The council's Natural Resources Monitoring Manager, Jason Donaghy, says rivers are running very low.
I look out my window quite often and you'll see the water tanker sort of doing deliveries, and at one stage it was just down my road, I could see, one or two a day. I mean, a lot of the people out here are on tank or on aquifer, so we don't have water. So if you don't conserve it, you just run out.
Mr Donaghy says Northland needs at least 80% of its normal rainfall come spring to steel it against more dry weather.
So that's quite a big target because we're so far behind. At that point, we'll know where we sit leading into the next summer. So if we're still down at 50% of normal rainfall, say in spring, then it's not going to take a lot to tip the region into another drought.
There is rain in store for many parts of the country this week, but Watercare is warning it would take significant amounts of rain and for a period of weeks to bring genuine relief to dry conditions. For Checkpoint, this is Annika Smith.
Well, that story is causing some debate here. 4-minute showers is the recommendation. Does that seem long or short to you? How long would your normal shower take? And are you showering more under COVID-19? Let us know your thoughts. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Cancer patients and New Zealanders on lists for elective surgery are facing long waits while the country remains under tight restrictions. It's left some worried if they're even going to receive the care they were promised, and doctors calling for an increase of urgent testing that has been put on hold. Katie Doyle reports.
Even before coronavirus hit the health system, a lack of access to gynecological services was in the news. Some DHBs were accused of calculated neglect towards conditions branded as women's problems. So to be on the verge of treatment only to have it evaporate as elective surgeries were cancelled has been hard to swallow. Ricky Hunton, who suffers from adenomyosis and probable endometriosis, was preparing for a hysterectomy when the lockdown came into force.
So I had an anaesthetist appointment, which is the last
appointment before surgery on the Monday before lockdown. Usually within 2 weeks I get a letter of the next stage. I have not had that. They have not communicated with me at all. Everything that's happened so far is an assumption from information I've been given by the news, essentially.
She says the setback has been devastating, given she has fought for more than a year to get on the elective list.
So I am taking morphine monthly, so it is incredibly frustrating, especially considering absolute mission it was to get surgery, get seen by a gynaecologist, get referred to pain clinic.
Ms Hunton says she's hopeful about having her hysterectomy at level 2, but at this rate, she isn't holding her breath. Healthcare delays have also affected access to cancer treatments. Peter Schmidt was first diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer early last year, undergoing chemotherapy and surgery, which saw 12 centimetres of his colon removed. However, by that time the cancer had spread, and in November, Mr Schmidt decided to take a break from treatment to spend quality time with his family. In March this year, he decided it was time for more chemotherapy, but the COVID-19 outbreak meant he was forced to wait 1 month for an important diagnostic CT scan.
As a result of the CT scan, they are now giving me the correct doses of chemo again, where before I got a CT scan, they were considering giving me oral chemo, which is not quite as suitable for my type of cancer.
Mr Schmidt isn't upset about the delay and understands why hospital work had to be scaled back to ensure the safety of patients and staff during the lockdown. He says he's received amazing support from groups like the Bowel Cancer New Zealand Facebook network, his family and medical staff.
I feel quite blessed because I lead that sort of lifestyle. I've lived a full life. I've always said I wanted to know when I'm going to die. Well, now my ticket's been clipped, so I have an idea, but you still will never know. So my initial diagnosis was 2 years, so I've celebrated 1 year. I think I will last another year, I'm quite confident.
The medical director for the Cancer Society, Dr Chris Jackson, says that while some test delays during lockdown were understandable, it's time to get things moving again. A failure to do so could have devastating consequences.
We know that when people's diagnosis and treatment is delayed, that does lead to overall worse outcomes. Figures out of the UK have suggested that, if applies to New Zealand, if we delayed investigation and treatment by up to 3 months for a range of conditions, as many as 400 people could die unnecessarily as a result of those delays.
For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
To Europe now. Today, Italy is lifting some of its lockdown measures more than 7 weeks after they were introduced. People will be able to leave their homes more freely and more workplaces will reopen. But in the region of Lombardy, one of the country's worst hit, grieving families say they just want justice for the dead. The ABC's Samantha Hawley has more.
Intensive care doctor Sophia Ananadou sobs. It was a terrible period, she says. She still can't believe what she's seen at the hospital in Cremona, in Lombardy, where she works.
The hardest moment was the young patients that I couldn't help, that died.
She cries for the young who couldn't be saved. Her husband, Dr. Daniel Cristodoro, works in the same intensive care unit that's equipped with just 8 ventilators.
There were a lot of people, like a war.
Nearby Bergamo suffered more deaths than any other northern region. Sara Gargantini's father, 81-year-old Giancarlo, died on March the 7th and was initially refused hospital admission. Life will never be the same again for all of us, for so many people. There's been so much trauma, she tells AM. I will be making a complaint to the prosecutor's office about what happened. I've already contacted a lawyer and I will never stop fighting. Thai woman Vatani Suvamol passes the time by playing the piano in her Bergamo home. She's lived in the region for 2 decades and started her family there.
Anger, disappointment, we want answers, from
from the government, from the politicians. Too many people died and too many people risked their lives.
The death toll in the region has reached more than 13,500.
Definitely more could and should have been done.
A trained lawyer, she says a number of people have begun legal action amid allegations the government was too slow to bring in lockdown measures. Italy's death toll is edging towards 30,000. Carlo Chiodi, also from Bergamo, lost his mother and father to the virus. I don't know who to be angry with. There's something that's not right, he says. For their memory, I want justice. For one of the worst affected regions in the world, it'll be a long road to recovery.
And that was Samantha Hawley reporting. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a leading oncologist says Pharmac's backtrack on funding for the lung cancer drug Keytruda is a major blow for equality in the health system. We talked to the public health boss who was in the front line of fighting swine flu in New Zealand. And a side effect of COVID-19 is some seriously bad hair days. We investigate the rise of the DIY do under Alert Level 3. We'd love your feedback. Tell us what, if anything, you're doing differently in Alert Level 3 than there's something you weren't able to do in Alert Level 4. Also, if you think people should be granted exemptions from mandatory isolation to see dying loved ones. A lot of you already getting in contact about that issue. Or if you are waiting until Level 1 or 2 for elective surgery or cancer treatment, we would love to hear from you as well. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. The Prime Minister is urging New Zealanders to stick out the lockdown as the country marks the first day in 7 weeks with no new cases of COVID-19 and no deaths. She says she wants those numbers to remain for long enough to be sure it's a reflection of Alert Level 3. Jacinda Ardern says she will lay out the rules under Level 2 on Thursday ahead of next Monday's decision on a possible move. The Prime Minister will be discussing the prospect of a return to trans-Tasman travel when she joins Australia's National Cabinet meeting tomorrow. Ms Ardern says both countries will compare notes about their health responses, including Australia's use of a contact tracing app. She says any potential travel could still be some time away. A High Court ruling which allowed a man to leave quarantine to visit his dying father will be used by the Health Ministry in assessing future isolation policy. Oliver Christiansen spent 36 hours with his father before his death from brain cancer, despite having been in mandatory quarantine after returning from the UK. The Prime Minister says the Ministry will use the judgment in deciding how to manage future isolation policy. S&P Global Ratings has reaffirmed New Zealand's high-level AA rating, despite its assessment that the country is probably already in recession. The agency says a large budget deficit is expected for the next 2 years, but the economy has strong fundamentals and was in a strong position before the pandemic hit. Auckland health authorities say their offer of COVID-19 tests to hundreds of Marist College students and staff is in order to reassure the community. 94 people in the cluster have tested positive, but the director of the Regional Public Health Service says there's been only one case in the past 2 weeks. And a judicial review hearing is underway at the High Court in Wellington over whether gun owners should be compensated for ammunition as well as weapons. The Council of Licensed Firearms Owners wants the court to decide whether they can be reimbursed for certain types of ammunition, which it is now illegal to buy, sell or possess. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time to go to the business news now with Sharon Brett Kelly. Hi, Sharon. Westpac's half-year profit slumps by nearly 50%.
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, and that's because the bank is having to budget for a huge rise in bad debt. So its cash profit for the 6 months to the end of March was $297 million, and that compares with $555 million last year, so 47% down. Interest rate margins were also quite a lot lower, and then costs were a lot higher. But the chief executive, David McLean, says the result reflects the early impacts of COVID-19. And so the bank has had to put aside nearly $200 million extra to cover expected bad debts. And that compares, Lisa, with $14 million for the same period last year. And when I talked to David McLean earlier today about those figures, he said it's an assessment of what might happen, and he stresses that it's an estimate that's based on economic modelling and on previous downturns. But he's saying that, there's so much uncertainty in New Zealand and outside of New Zealand, things like tourism, what's going to happen, how will the domestic tourism develop, and how can it cover the huge losses from our borders being closed, and that's just one sector. So what they're saying is there could be about $200 million in bad debts in the months ahead, but it could be more and it could be less. And the other thing that Westpac pointed out today is that it's made nearly $10 billion worth of mortgage, business and consumer relief, $10 billion worth, through deferred or rearranged payments and new loans, and that's to more than 24,000 customers.
Yeah, that's interesting because they are deferred payments. Obviously, the mortgage holiday, you've still got to pay up at some point, don't you?
Yeah, and that's what people need to understand. This isn't free money. It's just putting off what you have to do further down the line.
Interesting. It is no surprise that retail sales have literally, fallen off the cliff.
No surprise at all. In fact, they dropped nearly 80% in April. That's compared with the same month last year. And that's obviously that period when we were in lockdown or just coming out of lockdown or still in lockdown, but into level 3. And the other interesting thing is that in that first week of level 3 last week, online sales went up 350%, or about 3.5 times higher. But of course, those online sales just weren't enough for the sector to recover from what the chief executive of Retail NZ, Greg Harford, is calling economic carnage. And he's saying that there's going to be a wave of redundancies in the sector if the government doesn't step in and do more once that wage subsidy runs out in June. And as you say, it's no surprise at all, and that a lot of these businesses will be on a knife edge. They've got very tight margins. They're around 3.6%. And also what Greg Harford is saying is that level 3 has not much better than level 4. Okay, you can do the click and collect, or there'll be deliveries, but it hasn't made a lot of difference. And what they're really pushing for is to be able to open their doors, and they're putting a lot of pressure on the government for that to happen. They're also saying that, small loans are not necessarily the answer, and they are lobbying for some form of rent relief. And don't forget, this is a big sector. There's 27,000 retail businesses in New Zealand, and they're employing more than 200,000 people.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, what else has been going on today? The markets?
Yeah, the markets, the top 50 index here in New Zealand just eked out a tiny gain, up 0.26%. The ASX top 200 has found a bit of a sweet spot, and it's about 1% up today. It did fall early, but investors seem to recover some of that confidence after seeing Westpac's result that we've been talking about. Asian stock markets have been a little bit unsettled today, and that's over the ongoing US and China row over coronavirus. Japan's Nikkei is down about 2.8%, and the dollar, it's a little over 60 cents against the US dollar. It's at 94.25 cents against the Australian dollar and 64.25 yen. And against the British pound, it is at 0.48 pence.
Thanks, Sharon. That's Sharon Brett Kelly with our business news. A leading oncologist says Pharmac's decision to backtrack on funding for the lung cancer drug Keytruda is a major blow for equality in the health system. Laird Cameron, speaking on behalf of a group of lung cancer specialists, says every day the medicine is not funded, life and death decisions are made, which often come down to who can afford to privately fund the drug. Last week, Checkpoint revealed Pharmac had withdrawn its RFP, where companies pitch their prices, saying it couldn't afford the drug, with medicine costs rising as a result of COVID-19. But now the company that makes Keytruda has come forward challenging Pharmac CEO Sarah Fitt's claims about the effect COVID-19 will have on its budget. Guy Onespina has the story.
Lung cancer is New Zealand's biggest cancer killer, taking about 1,800 lives a year. But immunotherapy drugs like Keytruda can make a big difference. Medical oncologist Laird Cameron said while they were not miracle cures and didn't work for everyone, immunotherapy drugs could double the survival rates for patients with advanced lung cancer.
That's why for the first time really ever with the introduction of this class of drugs, we having cases of 5-year survival with advanced non-small cell lung cancer. And outside of targeted therapy, that's just never achieved with chemotherapy, which is our current standard in that group.
Recently, Checkpoint revealed that Pharmac had withdrawn an RFP for immunotherapy drugs, of which Keytruda is the best known, saying it didn't have the money due to budget constraints caused by COVID-19. Laird Cameron says it's a life and death decision.
In those patients who have the diagnosis of cancer and are looking to get the best treatment and the standard of care around the world, having a further delay in getting hold of that treatment is actually a life and death sort of decision and discussion that we're having in clinic.
And it's a discussion that often comes down to how much money you have.
Every clinic that I have with my lung cancer patients, there'll be a patient I'm caring for, and I'll say, look, I'd like to give you immunotherapy. It's not funded, and with the price, it's just not an option. And those where it is an option, there's the impact of their own financial burden and trying to decide, do I spend money to try and live longer or do I not?
He says the impact of that is increased inequality in the health system.
So when there's an effective treatment available, but only to those who can pay for it, the gap widens.
Pharmac CEO Sarah Fitt has said that increased costs for medical supplies during the pandemic were putting pressure on the agency's budget, which is capped at about $1 billion.
There's been quite significant impacts on manufacturing and supply chains, and we're already seeing significant price increases coming through. Freight, as you can imagine, with the sort of airline situation, freight is becoming a huge issue. So it's actually getting stuff into the country is proving challenging, but also the costs associated with it.
But those claims are now being challenged by Merck Sharp & Dohme, the company that makes Keytruda. New Zealand Managing Director Paul Smith said the company was not able to raise prices without giving a lot of notice because it had fixed contracts with Pharmac. Those contracts also meant the drug companies had to bear any increase in freight costs.
Whilst we as a company have seen some dramatic increases in freight costs, we just have to absorb that as our contract requires us to.
Paul Smith also challenged a claim by Pharmac that funding a drug like Keytruda would have cost about $200 million over the next 4 to 5 years. He said that estimate was based on the list price or the standard market price, but in confidential agreements between drug companies and Pharmac, rebates were offered, significantly lowering the price.
We never divulge those prices and they don't, but there are rebates in place which brings that down.
So the cost to Pharmac would be significantly less than $200 million over 4 or 5 years?
Yes.
But how does Merck Sharp & Dohme justify charging $100,000 or more to a lung cancer patient trying to self-fund the medication?
We have over 1,000 clinical trials currently with Keytruda globally, and they all cost millions of dollars to run. So it's a complex product. There's a huge investment in it.
He said Keytruda was funded for lung cancer in 54 countries. Philip Hope of the Lung Foundation said the fact that New Zealand is not one of them meant 30 patients a week were dying prematurely. He released a letter that the Health Minister David Clark wrote to him in November, saying a crucial aspect of New Zealand's cancer plan was equity for Māori, especially given they had the highest rates of lung cancer. Philip Hope said there was a gap between the rhetoric and the reality.
How is that fair when we have a government which pledges to be guided by equity, to be guided by fairness and well-being? We're not seeing that for our most vulnerable patients.
The minister's letter points out that Pharmac is independent of the government, which cannot interfere in its decisions. It also said Pharmac spent about $220 million on cancer medicines last year, and that the agency could use some of the extra $60 million that the government recently made available to fund new drugs. But for now, Keytruda for lung cancer is not among them. For Checkpoint, ko Gaian Espanatine.
Otaki is famous for its retail shopping and outlet stores, but following weeks of forced closure for most, some are having to think creatively to survive. Many businesses have relied on the government's wage subsidy to stay afloat and are hoping lockdown restrictions will continue to ease over the coming weeks. Our reporter Logan Church and cameraman Dom Thomas report.
Many businesses in Otaki live and die on foot traffic, people passing through. But as lockdown loomed, customers dried up. Maud Heath runs Artel Gallery on the town's main street. Her store is lined with paintings and sculptures and all manner of artworks, almost all by local artists. She has reopened at Alert Level 3, although any customers have to stay outside behind a table blocking the door.
It's been really, really difficult. Not being open. Now we're in Level 3. We can be open, but we're talking through doorways and windows to people. What we're finding in Otaki generally is that people just kind of aren't out and about, and the businesses here need the public and they need customers.
In the meantime, Maud is doing the same as many small business owners across New Zealand, building a web presence. A makeshift photo studio has been set up at the front of the store.
I took the website down and I've been building it from scratch. Myself, I know how to do it. So it's just been taking acres of photographs, getting our artists to send images in. But today you can see we've got a little studio set up here, and we've got a very famous cameraman taking the still shots for us. And we just have to be online. That's it. And I think that it will be like that for a long time.
But many other retail stores are quiet, lights off, boarded up. Vanessa Rangi from New Zealand Natural Clothing started back at work last Tuesday. Their store here in Otaki would usually be filled with customers. Instead, it's just her and another staff member helping fulfill a flood of online orders.
I've actually come back on Tuesday, but our bosses have been busy in our Northwood store with online orders.
Aside from the endless train of trucks driving past, Vanessa has noticed more people out since Level 4 lockdown ended.
Yeah, no, we've been just busy tidying up the store and getting things all ready to go for Level 2. There has been a few people out and about, grabbing coffees just down the road there at the cafe, and and the road's been a little bit busier.
Down the road at that cafe, a barista is making coffee from a small caravan sitting across the normal cafe's entrance. The Riverstone Cafe caravan is surrounded by road cones, and there are signs reminding a steady stream of customers of social distancing rules. Owner Janine Cornelius has been looking forward to reopening, and thanks to government support, she's been able to keep all of her staff employed.
Our staff are looked after because of the subsidy, and thank goodness that subsidy's there. We have put a lot, our money back into it again, just to keep our suppliers, because the other thing is, you tend to use local more than anything, so you don't want, because we're suffering, we don't want them to suffer, so you go that extra mile to get them paid.
Janine says they have been busy since reopening when Level 4 lockdown finished. She is confident the town will bounce back from COVID-19.
Everybody, yes, has been hanging out for that coffee, but I also feel that Otaki is a small community and our locals are supporting us. But yeah, hopefully I'll still be here in 6 weeks' time and and just keep going.
For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Accommodation providers in Taranaki are seeing signs that domestic tourism could help them recover from the devastation caused by the COVID-19 virus. With the borders closed for the foreseeable future, some operators say New Zealanders are already starting to make inquiries about bookings for next summer. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Joe Burke is the founder of Batch Break, which manages about 90 holiday homes in Taranaki. Ms Burke says cancellations came thick and fast when international flights stopped and the lockdown was announced.
Originally, when we first got notification that we were going into lockdown, we immediately lost 95% of our bookings. So that put us in a really vulnerable position, and I was very concerned about what the future holds. So we went through all sorts of different emotions over that.
But she says in the last couple of days, the business has turned a corner.
So we've got guests that are looking at making summer bookings and starting to think about what the future will hold for them, domestic tourism. Companies that will have essential workers coming into New Plymouth, and they're wanting properties. Some of our portfolio, potentially up to 2 to 3 months. So, it's good to have a little bit of interest and see a little bit of confidence return.
Ms Burke says summer bookings are now sitting at about 40% of capacity. Peter and Rosemary Tennant own New Plymouth's largest hotel and conference centre, the Devon. Mr Tennant says the business model at the 102-bed hotel has been turned on its head.
All major conferences, national, international conferences this year have obviously been cancelled. Numbers in-house have, the cancellations are thick and fast. And it's literally a totally different model. We were employing a staff of well over 100. We now have a team of 21 that are looking after the guests.
At its low point, the Devon had only 5 guests. But Mr Tennant is working on a plan to bounce back.
What we are working very hard to make happen is that the conferences that were booked this year, rolling those over so that instead of waiting another 10 or 12 years for that conference to hit Taranaki, rolling them over so the 2020 conferences are happening in 2021. And we're working very hard with the 2021 conferences to make sure they're not rolling them through to 2022.
Mr Tennant says he's confident Taranaki will recover faster than many other regions. Justine Gilliland is the Chief Executive of Venture Taranaki. She says international visitors only account for 20% of the tourism spend in the province, and it's an industry primed to rebound quickly. Ms Gilliland says a Go Local campaign is in the works to support the sector.
So that's first of all about our own people in our region getting out and about, and perhaps there's experiences in Taranaki that you've always meant to get out and do and you haven't quite had the chance. And then we'll be looking to launch that more into a national campaign, quite targeted at the types of visitors that we really want to attract into our region to hopefully spend some cash.
Ms Gilliland says, however, there is no sugarcoating the economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis on Taranaki.
In terms of employment, we're looking at potentially 5,500 jobs, which is quite a significant number, obviously, over 9% of our workforce, and that unemployment could rise to 10%. Of particular concern under that is the impact on Māori and also other vulnerable people who are always the more impacted in these types of scenarios.
A report prepared by the economic research company Infometrics anticipates the province will experience an 8.5% contraction in GDP for the 12 months through to March next year. This is slightly worse than the 8% drop forecast nationally. I Taranaki mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin ahau.
Senior Democrats are rallying around their presidential nominee, Joe Biden, after the former vice president publicly denied an allegation of sexual assault. A former aide of Mr Biden's, Tara Reid, says in 1993 Mr Biden pinned her up against a wall and assaulted her. Over the weekend, he denied the allegation.
I don't remember any type of complaint she may have made. It was 27 years ago, and I don't remember, nor does anyone else that I'm aware of. And the fact is that I don't remember. I don't remember any complaint ever having been made.
Today, the head of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez, told CNN if there was any truth to the allegation, Barack Obama's team would not have selected Mr Biden as his running mate.
They looked at the entire history of Joe Biden, his entire career. And I'll tell you, if Barack Obama had any indication that there was an issue, Barack Obama would not have had him as his vice president. Barack Obama trusted Joe Biden. I trust Joe Biden. And those investigations have been done.
Tara Reid says she was too frightened at the time to explicitly complain about the alleged assault. But the chief strategist for Barack Obama's presidential campaigns and now a contributor to CNN, David Axelrod, says some top investigators have looked into Mr. Biden's past.
Their job was to come up with every bit of evidence about people's lives. They were to look into their records, they were looking into their personal lives, and certainly any sort of formal complaint would have been of interest to them. And I will tell you, there were, close to 30 candidates at the beginning. By the end, when you got down to sort of the final few, that vetting was very intense. And there were candidates who were knocked out by things that were discovered by these vetters. They were very thorough, they were very professional. So I think it's important to note that that process turned up nothing, and not just about this particular incident, but no salacious gossip, no pattern of behavior, none of the things that you would expect to see if someone was capable of this kind of an act.
David Axelrod speaking about Joe Biden there. Back home now, and bad hair days have turned into bad hair weeks for some, and professional help is still a while away. Supermarkets are reporting a 140% jump in hair dyes, and hair clipper sales have doubled as Kiwis take hair into their own hands during lockdown. Hair salons and barbers won't be able to open until level 2, and things may look a little different with new social distance and safety measures. Our cameraman Nick Munro and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report.
As the lockdown's gotten longer, so too have New Zealanders' locks. With hairdressers unable to tend to our tresses, many of us are now sporting new do's. ACT leader David Seymour's been getting lots of attention at online select committee meetings for his new voluminous look.
Oh, it's about 3 times longer than usual. I really thought about getting one before lockdown because I could kind of see it was going to happen sooner or later. It was just so busy at that time, and I'm now regretting it. The ACT Party's always believed in freedom, but my hair's been taking the philosophy to heart more than I'd like. And so I've thought it's actually time to institute some rigorous control. So every morning I get up and I wash it to soften it up and then beat it into a shape that's vaguely coherent.
Split ends, unruly roots and tangled tresses, everyone's hair presents its own unique challenges. For Mr Seymour, his is a welcome reminder of days gone by.
I last had hair like this when I was 17, and an old mate said, "This is the Dave I remember. All you need is a Grammar rugby jersey and a box of Stella Artois under one arm."
Some have found it easier than others to wait until they're reunited with their hairdressers.
Kind of over it, and I'm kind of over this. I literally haven't brushed it in 2 weeks, so I'm gonna cut it off. Don't have any scissors though, so I've got this knife.
For Hamilton woman Corrie Walker, it was a case of desperate times and desperate measures. She used a kitchen knife to hack off her shoulder-length locks a few weeks into lockdown.
If you're wondering, no, I'm not having a mental breakdown.
A somewhat drastic measure at the time, she definitely doesn't regret it.
It feels nicer, not having to stress about the hair.
But when lockdown lifts, she says she may get some help in finishing the job.
Maybe just tidy up a bit, because there is bits where it's like shorter hair and there's like a couple of longer strands, so I'll definitely get it tidied up. I think if you are in my boat and you've done it and you do need to get it fixed up, then just pre-warn them, don't just rock up. But they definitely won't like that.
The owner of Wellington Hair Salon, Miss Fox, Karen Madam, says she's had a few clients attempt to take their hair into their own hands.
I've done lots of Zoom, like the Zoom or the house parties with clients. They're halfway through cutting their husband's hair. So actually teaching them, going through step by step, or and there's been a few home colours. When we've talked to people as well, I can see little shiny roots going on. Some little orange, lots of orange. So they can't wait to come back, which is awesome.
Countdown has reported a 140% increase in its hair dye sales during lockdown. Shades of blonde are apparently proving the most popular. The warehouse says hair clipper sales have doubled. But there's an end in sight for those at-home jobs. Hairdressers, barbers, nail salons and non-medical massage services will be able to open when we eventually make it to level 2. Government advice recommends against magazines and refreshments being served, and Karen Madam says there will be fewer people in salons.
We do have to touch our clients, and it's something that we can't do here without that. So it's better to only go into when it's safe for us and when it's safe for our clients as well. They talk about the sanitising of the salon, washing your hands, all of that sort of thing. Clients don't come in if they're sneezing and coughing. That should really always be happening.
And she says they'll be going flat out when the doors do open.
It is already booked, and every single person wants to be booked in on the day of opening.
The appointments couldn't come soon enough for salons who are desperate to get back to business and put those bad hair days to rest. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
You really need to watch that one back online with the big kitchen knife hacking off the hair.
At 6, I'm Paul Brennan. The prospect of a Trans-Tasman bubble will be canvassed when the Prime Minister patches into Australia's National Cabinet meeting via video link tomorrow. Jacinda Ardern will join the meeting of Australian ministers and state premiers on the invitation of her counterpart Scott Morrison. Here's our deputy political editor Craig McCulloch.
The call is a chance for both sides of the Tasman to compare notes over their respective battles with COVID-19. Ms Ardern says both countries are in the enviable position of being able to consider reopening their borders to one another. She says such a step would be a boon for the economy, but cautions it won't occur in the next few weeks. New Zealand first needs to lock in its progress, she says, and ensure suitable health precautions are in place. Ko Craig McCulloch aho.
The public health expert Michael Baker is reiterating the message New Zealanders must maintain discipline in level 3, despite the country recording no new cases today. There were also no new deaths reported. But there have now been more than 600 level 3 breaches since last week, with 191 over the weekend. Professor Baker from University of Otago says countries such as South Korea demonstrate the real risk of large second wave outbreaks.
Things can change very quickly with this virus, and so I think there's no cause for celebration yet. I think it's a great symbolic triumph today to have no new cases. It does not mean that the virus has gone from New Zealand.
Michael Baker urges New Zealanders to stay patient and stick to crucial practices like social distancing. Jacinda Ardern says New Zealanders must not squander the progress now by relaxing or flouting the rules. She will lay out the rules for Alert Level 2 on Thursday. The Queenstown Mayor has appealed to the Prime Minister to ease travel restrictions under Alert Level 2. Queenstown's tourist-based economy has been decimated following COVID-19 and with Air New Zealand pulling its air services out of the town. Jim Bolt says he signed a letter to Jacinda Ardern today asking for travel restrictions under Level 2 to be eased so that domestic tourism can resume. The letter also asks for careful consideration of a Trans-Tasman bubble. Mr Bolt says he's also asked for the government to reconsider the crowd restrictions for ski fields. He says at the moment the restrictions allow for 2 people per hectare of ski terrain, which he says seems like overkill. New Zealanders bought 5 weeks' worth of fast food during the first week of Alert Level 3. ASB senior economist Jane Turner says the strong bounce in sales gives some hope to other businesses dealing with the impact of the Level 4 lockdown. Despite the huge spike in takeout sales, consumer confidence hit a record low in April, below levels seen during the global financial crisis. Ms Turner says she expects unemployment to hit 9.4%, meaning consumer confidence could fall even further. While fast food might remain on the menu, she says that could impact the purchases of bigger ticket items such as houses and cars. The health authorities in Auckland say COVID-19 is probably not circulating from the Marist College cluster, but people should get tested anyway. Hundreds of students and staff at the school are being offered tests this week. However, the director of the Regional Public Health Service, William Ranger, says the cluster has had only one case in the past 2 weeks, and the testing is mainly about reassuring the community.
So that's to staff, to students and to the families of students, that there is no virus circulating amongst those people before they go back to school at some stage in the future.
Dr. William Ranger. Watercare says a drop in Auckland's water use over the rainy weekend shows people are still watering their lawns in the drought. The city is under level 1 water restrictions after its storage lake levels dropped below 50% for the first time in 25 years. Watercare Chief Executive Raveen Jaduram says Auckland's water usage dropped by 20 to 30 million litres over the wet weekend. He says the significant drop can only mean people are still using water outside their homes.
The difference, between 400 and 420, 430, that 20 to 30 million litres, that's where the water is used outside. And that's what we're really asking Aucklanders to stop doing.
Watercare's Raveen Jaduram. It's 6:04. In sport this evening, the state of the Warriors' fitness will be assessed, or was to be assessed today at the start of their 2 weeks in isolation at Tamworth in New South Wales. Having trained on their own for the last 6 weeks, coach Stephen Kearney is keen to find out what shape his players are in, less than 4 weeks out from the scheduled restart of the National Rugby League competition. Despite having permission to return to training, Kearney says they'll also have to adhere to quarantine rules.
9 players and 1 coach or 1 trainer, so a total of 10 allowed on the field at once. So I think that may be until the end of the week. I've been really proud of the club right from the outset, is being able to go with the flow, and that's what's presented to us, and that's what we're going to have to do.
Warriors coach Stephen Kearney there. And that's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. New Zealand continues to be at alert level 3. Stay at home for both work and schooling if that's possible. Limit non-essential travel, and when going shopping, do it on your own and stay local. Public transport should only be used if you don't have an alternative means of getting around. Stay 2 metres away from others while waiting and when you're aboard. And don't forget to wash your hands as soon as possible after you arrive at your destination. You can find full guidance on what you can and can't do at Alert Level 3 at covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast taking us through to midnight tomorrow Tuesday for the North Island except Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Periods of rain or showers. There could be some heavy falls, possible squally thunderstorms. They should ease in Gisborne overnight. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers, more frequent for a time tomorrow afternoon. Thunderstorms possible in Wairarapa. Marlborough, except Kaikoura Coast. Also Nelson and Buller. Showers possibly heavy, thundery with hail. Westland and Northern Fiordland, occasional showers easing south of Hokitika. Sometime today and becoming fine everywhere later tomorrow. Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, scattered rain spreading north this evening. Some heavy falls are possible with hail tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Southern Fiordland, showers spreading north, becoming heavy with hail overnight tonight, snow down to 500 metres in the morning tomorrow. Chatham Islands, rain turning to showers in the morning, some heavy with hail. It's coming up to 6:07.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. For the first time since the COVID-19 outbreak 7 weeks ago, New Zealand has today reported no new cases of coronavirus. There were times during the level 4 lockdown where new daily cases peaked in the high 80s, in stark contrast to the past fortnight where the number of new cases has been in single digits each day. But as dozens of people flocked to beaches over the weekend, our first at alert level 3, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, is warning us not to pop the champagne corks yet.
It is just one moment in time. The real test is later this week when we factor in the incubation period for the virus and the time it takes for people to display symptoms, which is generally 5 to 6 days after exposure. So that's when we will have an indication if there are any new cases coming through that might be emerging in the community as a result of our shift from level 4 to level 3. We cannot afford to squander all the hard work and effort of the past weeks. We did see at the weekend that it can be easy to start slackening off, and we need to maintain discipline and keep pushing on and sustain the advantage that we have fought so hard for.
One of the key aspects, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also used her post-Cabinet press conference to echo the Director-General's caution.
Despite this result, my message remains the same, as I note does the message of Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. Stay the course. We cannot afford to squander the good work to date when our end goal is so close and within reach. Next Monday, we will make the decision on whether or not we will move to Alert Level 2. That day represents the end of a 2-week life cycle, as it were, a period of transmission of the virus. We need every day between now and next Monday to know for sure that we succeeded in locking in the gains of Level 4, recovered effectively in our waiting room of Level 3, and are in the position to move down again and give New Zealanders back greater freedoms.
One of the key aspects of that freedom is exploring the possibility of a trans-Tasman bubble.
Today I can confirm that I've accepted Prime Minister Morrison's invitation to participate via video link in the Australian National Cabinet meeting scheduled for tomorrow. The meeting will discuss a range of matters in relation to the COVID response on both sides of the Tasman, including the creation of a trans-Tasman travel bubble. I will update media on the meeting tomorrow, in fact just after the meeting. But it is fair to say such a meeting is without precedent and highlights both what's happened with the cooperation at a state level in Australia, and then also the mutual importance of our two countries and economies to each other. Both our countries' strong record on fighting the virus has placed us in the enviable position of being able to plan the next stage in our economic rebuild and to include trans-Tasman travel and engagement in our strategy.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern late this afternoon. And Checkpoint will bring you all the details on that discussion between the Prime Minister and her Australian counterpart in the program tomorrow. Despite 0 new cases of COVID-19, today a former public health boss who was at the centre of New Zealand's battle against swine flu says coronavirus is going to be with us for years to come. Dr. Mark Jacobs was the Director of Public Health during the 2009 outbreak in New Zealand, in which 49 people died and more than 1,100 people were hospitalised, 119 of those in intensive care. Dr. Jacobs, who now works with the World Health Organization, says any urge to celebrate is premature.
It's obviously good news that it's down to 0 new confirmed cases, but that's one day. There's a long way to go yet. It's still a long haul in New Zealand. It's a long haul right around the world, our response to COVID. So it's good news, but we would hope that there'd be a lot more good news that's quite consistent for quite some time yet before we start feeling confident. But the problem fundamentally is not really just what's happening in New Zealand, it's what's happening in the world. COVID-19 is going to be with us for a long time yet. We are far, far away from it stopping spreading in other countries around the world. Really, it's going to be with us at least until there's a very good vaccine, and that vaccine is available widely right around the world. So, I think we still need to be very cautious in New Zealand and actively looking out for it, actively responding to cases and thinking about how we can minimise the risk at the border, I think for years. Rather than days or weeks or months.
Doctor, you were the head of public health in 2009 during the swine flu outbreak. What are the differences between COVID-19 and the swine flu?
Certainly, in terms of what it can mean for individual people, certainly I think the evidence is that the chance of very severe illness and dying from COVID-19 is more likely than swine flu. But swine flu caused probably around 500,000 deaths globally. It caused, I think there were 3,500 or so confirmed cases in New Zealand and about 20 deaths. But in fact, studies that ESR did looking at whether people were infected with swine flu found that actually it was about 29% of New Zealanders ended up with immunity to swine flu. And of those, probably about 780,000 or so were actually infected during that pandemic. So it did actually infect a lot of people. And I think there's no evidence that so far COVID-19 is anywhere near that in New Zealand.
So we have, up until we started off using the pandemic plan that was developed at the time of the swine flu. And in fact, today, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, said while they initially followed that plan, they've now realised that COVID behaves quite differently to influenza in many ways. So that plan wasn't quite right and they've needed to tweak it. So in your mind, what about that old plan wouldn't be right for the situation we now find ourselves in?
Well, firstly, there's no vaccine yet, whereas we knew with swine flu that if we bought enough time, then we'd likely be able to get a vaccine in a time that was going to be useful. Second one was that we had stockpiles of antivirals. We don't yet have medication that we know is going to be helpful for COVID yet. Another thing that is different about COVID, but it's actually similar to the other coronaviruses like SARS, is that it tends to spread most easily in clusters, in groups. And we've certainly seen that in New Zealand about how many clusters there have been. And that's been the experience around the world. Now, what that means actually is that it is easier to actually stamp it out. So the swine flu plan and the swine flu response talked about keeping it out and stamping it out. But that was actually about buying time and about trying to flatten the curve, as people would have heard about. Whereas with COVID, it is actually possible to stamp it out. And obviously that's what has led to the approach in New Zealand to try to eliminate that sort of local spread. So that is a fundamental difference. One of the other things is that because we found out quite a lot about COVID through the response in China, we knew actually that strong social distancing measures actually make a very big difference. And so that then I think has influenced governments around the world in their decision making. And so there's the lockdowns that have happened around COVID, they weren't thought about in terms of swine flu. They were thought about for a very, very, very severe flu, like if it was like Spanish flu, but not for what swine flu turned out to be. So a lot of the basics are the same and a lot of the language is the same. And the planning that was done before swine flu and actually the response around swine flu, I'm sure has been very, very helpful for really turning on the COVID response. Now, one of the things that we found with swine flu was that actually it wasn't affecting the elderly as much. It was actually much more affecting young children. So about a third of school children in New Zealand got swine flu, whereas the elderly were relatively spared. And we think that's because they were exposed to a similar strain of influenza years before, and so they still had some immunity. So that was the experience then. But one of the other things that we learned also was that we hadn't thought about previously or been aware of is that it was also affecting pregnant women. And so the fact that we were starting to see pregnant women get seriously ill with swine flu meant that they were then added to the list of people who were really focused on and who could get the influenza vaccine. And that's continued to be the case since then.
So a third of New Zealand school kids, you believe, got the swine flu?
That is what the study done by ESR that was organised by the ministry, that's what it showed. Now, probably half of those at least had no symptoms at all, but they were infected.
Could that be the case with COVID-19? Could we have a bunch of silent spreaders among our children?
Well, in fact, because COVID-19 or this coronavirus is a very new virus, we're assuming that everybody is at risk of catching it, if you like. So we don't think there's really much in the way of immunity that anybody has already got. What we are seeing, though, is that there are very small numbers of young people getting seriously ill with it. That's it's much more badly affecting older people, but younger people are catching it. But the people who are generally ending up in hospital are older people or people with other health issues.
But are younger people catching it, showing no signs of it, and are able to pass it on while we are unaware of the fact that they're even ill?
We don't know yet. Whenever we get a new virus, there's always things that we learn as time goes on, and there's a lot of things we don't yet know about this strain of coronavirus. We don't know how many people are in the community in any country getting infected and actually not showing any symptoms. We assume that it could be quite a few, but there's lots of different estimates from different studies around the world with wildly different answers so far. So that's an open scientific question. But certainly there's no doubt there'll be some people in the community who've been infected already and who potentially could have passed it on to other people who have no idea they are infected, which is why the approach of having a big emphasis on everybody doing social distancing now and lockdown is quite important, because if we only had to worry about the sick people, then that would be the focus of the response in countries. We'd just be emphasising sick people staying at home and so on. But because it's possible, quite likely some people will be getting infected, not getting sick. Everybody needs to be aware of the importance of these sort of lockdown measures.
And that was Dr. Mark Jacobs. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. One of the organisers of repatriation flights for New Zealand citizens and visa holders from India says the evacuees are being looked after well at a central Auckland hotel. The New Zealand government arranged 3 flights from India, 2 from New Delhi and 1 from Mumbai. The final flight arrived in Christchurch last week. Producer Jeremy Parkinson has more.
Carrick Singh brought his 95-year-old father home to New Zealand on the first repatriation flight, which landed last Saturday week. They are all grateful to be home, and their only complaint was a minor one over the hotel menu.
Indian food would have been a lot better on the menu, but at the same time we are in quarantine, and with the restrictions all around, I believe hotel management and the government is doing as good they can. They have changed the menu after the complaints went in, I think.
He says to his knowledge, none of the more than 200 passengers from his flight who landed in Auckland have tested positive for COVID-19, and all are in good health and spirits.
I haven't heard any single case yet, fingers crossed. So far, everybody seems pretty happy and healthy.
They are allowed out of their rooms under relatively strict but not overbearing conditions.
No, we are not confined to the room. We can go to the lobby out there, and then as long as we stay in the same bubble and keep the social distancing, we can have a coffee. There is also walks available, but then you have to register for 10 or 15 minutes walk. They take you for a walk. Yes, we can move around.
Mr. Singh says his father is very much looking forward to leaving the hotel and getting back to his wider family.
Yes, very, very happy to be home. He arrived on the Anzac Day. It will be a very good moment for him when he sees his grandkids.
Carrick Singh is still taking calls from many people still stranded in India wanting to get home to New Zealand.
I think there is 150 people in North, and there is some roughly 100, maybe 100 around in South as well. So there is quite a number of people still there, which are New Zealand citizens and permanent residents.
But despite there being enough New Zealanders still in India to fill more flights, Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters has said there won't be any more flights from India organised by the government.
I doubt there will be another flight, but I request Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and also to Honourable Winston Peters, maybe one more flight will ease up the pain of all those people who are held.
Carrick Singh and his fellow passengers will be free to leave their hotel this Saturday morning. For Checkpoint, I'm Jeremy Parkinson.
Gun owners are challenging the government's decision to ban certain types of ammunition without compensation. A judicial review hearing is underway at the High Court in Wellington between the Council of Licensed Firearm Owners and the Minister of Police. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
The Arms Amendment Act made it an offence to possess, sell or supply certain types of ammunition. It was brought in after the Christchurch mosque shootings last year and also included a buyback scheme for guns. The Gun Owners Group says the government failed to properly consult or compensate for the ammunition. Jack Hodder QC, who's representing the group, told the court it was almost an afterthought.
It's self-evident that firearms are inherently dangerous. They can injure, kill people. So this case is not about firearms themselves, it's about ammunition. And our submission, one of the things that will emerge from the narrative is that ammunition is almost an afterthought.
The gun group says the legislation was rushed and there was confusion about which ammunition was illegal. It says there was no evidence it posed any additional safety risks. The group questions whether the Police Minister, Stuart Nash, took the wrong information into account. Jack Hodder QC went through Mr Nash's comments that ammunition has a smaller value than weapons.
And so if one has got a substantial stockpile for the reasons of, for example, converting it into more usable ammunition, as Ms McKee described in her affidavit, then you may finish up with a respectable value of material held.
The group wants the court to decide whether gun owners are entitled to be reimbursed. The hearing before Justice Cook will continue tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Court Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
There is growing confusion for parents in Australia regarding when and how to send their children back to schools. Some pupils have already returned to the classroom, but the rules vary by age and in different states. And yesterday, the Federal Education Minister accused the Victorian Premier of a failure of leadership over keeping children at home for too long. The ABC's Rachel Mealy has more.
It's a public holiday in Queensland today, so parents who've been overseeing homeschooling get to take a breather. Penny's children are in prep and grade 3. She says she's found homeschooling more challenging than she expected.
They're not particularly interested in learning from me. My daughter has told me that I'm her mum, not her teacher, and she doesn't want me to teach her. So just trying to motivate them to sit down and, do a little bit has been challenging.
How do you feel now about when school should go back?
I'm keener than I thought I would be. And initially I had taken them out a little earlier, but now that it's getting there, I'm very happy for them to be going back when they can. As long as, I'm torn. I obviously want them to be safe and not get sick and not spread sickness, but I think it would be great for the preppies particularly to get back.
The Queensland Premier is granting the wishes of parents like Penny. Anastasia Palaszczuk says children in kindy, prep and year 1, as well as years 11 and 12, will return to school next Monday.
So this is great news, and of course we know how important those early years are. We also know how important year 11s and 12s are, especially when they're trying to finish that education, especially in year 12. It's a very important year. So from May the 11th, kindy and prep years 11s and 12s will return to school.
Restarting classroom learning became a hot-button issue over the weekend when the Federal Education Minister Dan Tehan criticised the Victorian Premier for not reopening schools sooner.
This is a failure of leadership by Dan Andrews. Let's be clear about this. And you know where the impact is being felt? On the most vulnerable children, on those children from low socio-economic backgrounds.
The Education Minister later said he'd gone too far and retracted those comments. Today, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews said the matter was ancient history.
I saw the comments, and then I read a statement later on in the day, but that was not my focus. Ultimately, we need to be really clear about this. Fighting amongst ourselves is not what's needed. Fighting this virus is what's most important.
A primary school in Melbourne and another in Sydney have been closed today for cleaning after a teacher in one and a student in the other tested positive to the virus. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian says this will probably be par for the course from here on.
And I say to parents and teachers and school communities, this is likely to occur on a more regular basis when schools go back, but we've demonstrated from our experience in term 1 best practice when it comes to isolating a case, shutting down a school, doing a deep clean and then resuming activities as soon as possible once contacts have been established. So whilst it's happened again today, I anticipate it will happen more frequently, but please have confidence that we've gone through all the processes and we know what it takes to keep everybody safe when that occurs.
The New South Wales Premier ending that report from Rachel Mealy. In the US, families that once donated to local food banks are now having to rely on them. The pandemic has left nearly 30 million Americans unemployed. Angelica Cassis of the BBC spoke to some of them at a food bank in Texas.
It's affected everybody. As you can see, all these people are here. Everybody that's had good jobs are here. And some of them are first-timers. They're shocked that they're in this line, that they never thought that they would be in a line of needing anything.
Demand for food assistance is rising at an extraordinary rate throughout the United States.
I got my grandson with me over here, and he asked me what we're going to eat for breakfast and stuff. I said, hey, I don't know what to tell him, whatever you can find, I tell him.
Here in San Antonio, thousands of families are lining up in the Texas heat for help from the local food bank.
I'm used to being able to handle myself, take care of everything, and now I find myself having to, look for help and wait in these long lines just to get by.
I live in a 2-income household. You don't really realize how much the second income actually helps out until, you don't have it.
The coronavirus shutdown has caused nearly 30 million people to lose their jobs, and millions of others have had their household income reduced.
We've depleted our savings now. We're at the point where we're living paycheck to paycheck. I have to worry about whether we're going to have groceries next week or not.
Brenda's a hairdresser. She stopped working 2 months ago and doesn't know when she'll be back.
Everything's been thrown completely off balance now, especially with the kids not being able to go back to school until next year. I think that's what's going to hurt us the most, is because I won't be able to return myself to work. I'm trying to figure out how we're going to make ends meet if I don't go back to work.
For many struggling families, this pandemic has proven to be worse than any other fallout they've had before.
Usually I donate to the food bank whenever we can. Now, here I am.
And that was Angelica Cassis reporting. And before we go, some feedback, mixed feedback on whether people should be allowed out of mandatory isolation on compassionate grounds to visit dying relatives. Rachel says it's an absolute disgrace that a man had to hire a QC and go to court to get to see his father. Shame on New Zealand. On the other hand, Peter says, look at what compassion has led to in Europe. Sometimes the greater good has to prevail. One rule for all is what's needed to be applied. Thank you all for getting in touch. Don't forget you can check out our stories online, particularly our video stories. Morning Report will be back with you first thing tomorrow morning, and we'll see you tomorrow evening. Have a wonderful night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister will discuss a possible trans-Tasman travel bubble when she joins Australia's cabinet meeting via video link tomorrow. A public health expert is urging people to maintain social distancing, saying today's lack of new cases does not mean the virus is gone. An economist says businesses can take heart from the spike in the sales that saw 5 times the normal spending on fast food in the first week of level 3. And Watercare says the fall in water use over the rainy weekend shows Aucklanders are still watering their lawns in the drought. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Tonight on Nights, doing social work online with Otago University's Emily Cadell and Brenda Pilot from social service providers Aotearoa. This week's sportscaster Helene Elliott remembers some of the big sports stories of her career from lockdown in LA. Wellington cab driver Gordy Chafee has a song for the road, and Luke Wood has been doing more